Christmas dinner table, my ex-husband made a joke at my expense, mocking my new fiancé in front of everyone. He sneered, "So you replaced me with a janitor? That's embarrassing." My children laughed, and in that moment, I felt something inside me crack. I stood up, ready to leave. But later that night, when my fiancé arrived in a brand new Bentley, looked straight at my ex-husband, and calmly said 3 unexpected words, everything changed. My hands were shaking as I stood outside Porter's front door, gripping the bottle of wine I'd brought for Christmas dinner. I was 62 years old, yet I felt like the anxious young woman I'd been nearly 40 years ago whenever I had to face my ex-husband again. The cold December wind cut through my coat, but the unease I felt had nothing to do with the weather. I told myself I shouldn't have come. I could have stayed home, made up an excuse, said I wasn't feeling well. But when my oldest child called 3 weeks earlier and actually sounded like he wanted me there, a small spark of hope lit up inside me. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe, after 4 years of distance and silence, my children were finally ready to accept that their mother deserved happiness too. The door opened before I could knock. Porter stood there in his expensive charcoal suit, the same one he'd worn during our divorce hearings. Even at 65, he carried himself like the powerful attorney he still was. Straight posture, confident expression, an air that once made me feel safe, but now felt unbearably arrogant. He greeted me by name, his tone flat, his eyes quickly scanning my dress and shoes. "You're early," he said. I lifted the wine bottle, suddenly feeling foolish for thinking it was enough. "Merry Christmas," I replied. He stepped aside without taking it, and I walked back into the house that had been my home for 35 years. Nothing had changed. The marble floors I used to clean, the antique furniture I polished every week, the hallway lined with family photos that, after the divorce, had been carefully rearranged so I no longer appeared in them. Voices came from the dining room, and my stomach tightened. All 3 of my children were there. Michael, successful and working at his father's firm, Sarah, married into money, and David, still supported financially by Porter. During the divorce, they had all chosen sides, and it hadn't been mine. Sarah greeted me with a smile that looked warm on the surface but felt distant. She hugged me briefly, then stepped back to look me over. She complimented my dress, and I thanked her, not mentioning where I'd bought it or how carefully I'd budgeted for it. Michael appeared next, drink in hand, his expression skeptical as always. He asked where my boyfriend was. I told him Donovan would join us later. That work had kept him longer than expected. I spoke calmly, the way I'd learned to speak during years of standing beside Porter at formal events. From behind me, David laughed and asked what kind of job required working on Christmas. I turned to him and explained that Donovan ran a cleaning business and sometimes handled urgent calls, even on holidays. The room went quiet. I saw my children exchange knowing looks, the same silent communication they used years ago when they wanted to make me feel small. Porter's voice came from the doorway, smooth and sharp at the same time. "A cleaning business," he said, with a thin smile. The familiar tightness returned to my chest, that old feeling of being dismissed and talked down to. I quietly said that Donovan was a good man, that he treated me with kindness and respect. I stopped myself from saying more. I knew better than to start a confrontation that would only turn against me. We sat down for dinner. The table was set with the china that had once belonged to my grandmother, somehow awarded to Porter in the divorce. I took the seat farthest from everyone else, close enough to be present, far enough to feel separate. As the meal began, conversation flowed easily around me. Michael talked about his latest legal victory, and I listened, smiling politely, reminding myself why I had come. I was there because I still believed that my story and my happiness mattered. Sarah went on about her children's accomplishments at their private school. David shared his newest business idea, casually mentioning that Porter might invest in it. I listened, smiled, and added a comment here and there, but mostly I felt like an outsider watching a family that no longer felt like mine. "So, Mom," Sarah said as the main course ended, "tell us more about this Donovan. How did you meet him?" Her tone sounded polite, but I noticed the quick look she exchanged with her brothers. I knew what was coming and instinctively braced myself. "We met at the grocery store," I replied carefully. I was struggling to load a heavy bag into my car, and he offered to help. "How romantic," David said with a grin. "A true hero." "He'd just finished a job," I added calmly. So his uniform was a little dirty, but he was very kind. "Uniform?" Michael leaned forward. "Which company does he work for?" "He owns his own business," I said, stressing the word owns. "It's called Superior Cleaning Services." "Superior?" Porter repeated slowly. "Interesting name. I wonder if the work matches it." A chill settled in my stomach. I recognized that tone. It was the same one he'd used for years when he felt in control and knew I wasn't. "What time is he supposed to get here?" Sarah asked, glancing at her designer watch. "Dinner's almost over." "He said by 7:30, I replied, checking my own simple watch. It was nearly 8. "Maybe he got lost," Michael said, pretending to sound concerned. "That neighborhood can be confusing if you're not used to it." The comment stung, because it was probably true. Porter's house sat in one of the most exclusive areas in the city, where a service truck would clearly stand out. "Or maybe he changed his mind about meeting the family," David added lightly. "Some people get nervous around success." That was enough. I stood up so quickly my chair scraped loudly across the floor. "I think I should go. This was a mistake." "Oh, don't be dramatic," Porter said, using the same dismissive tone he'd always used. "They're just joking." "Joking?" I turned toward him, years of swallowed anger rising to the surface. "Mocking the man I care about is funny to you?" "We're just worried about you," Sarah said, her concern sounding rehearsed. "You have to admit, it's strange that at your age, you're with someone so different from what you're used to." Different from Porter. Different from the life I lost when I finally found the strength to leave a marriage that had drained me for decades. "You don't know him," I said quietly, grabbing my purse. "And you don't know what makes me happy." "We know you deserve better than some janitor who can't even show up on time," Michael said casually. The word hit hard, not because there was anything wrong with honest work, but because of the way he said it, with such clear contempt. "He's not a janitor," I started, but Porter laughed and cut me off. "Cleaning service janitor, what's the difference?" he said, standing up and towering over me the way he always had. "You replaced me with someone who cleans toilets. Do you have any idea how that looks to our children?" The room went silent except for the steady ticking of the old grandfather clock. My children watched, just like they used to when Porter would lecture me in front of them. "You know what I think?" Porter continued, his voice smooth and confident, like he was in court. "I think this is a late-life crisis. You're so desperate for attention that you'll take it from anyone, even someone completely beneath you." My eyes burned, but I refused to let tears fall. Not here. Not in front of people who would see them as weakness. "You don't get to judge my choices anymore," I said, my voice trembling despite my effort to stay calm. "You gave up that right a long time ago." "Here we go again," David muttered. "Same old story." That casual dismissal hurt more than anything Porter said. These were my children, the people I'd devoted my life to, treating my pain like an inconvenience. "I'm leaving," I said, heading for the door. "Good," Michael called after me. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before bringing your charity case around." I was almost outside when the sound of an engine stopped me. Headlights swept across the front window. It wasn't the old truck I'd imagined, but something sleek and unmistakably expensive. "Well," Porter said, stepping beside me to look out the window. "This should be interesting." "Looks like your janitor finally decided to show up," Porter said dryly. But as the car rolled to a stop beneath the porch lights, I saw something that didn't fit that image at all. Donovan stepped out of a brand-new Bentley, the kind of car that cost more than I'd earned in 2 years at the catering business I lost after the divorce. He walked toward the house with the same steady confidence I knew so well, but tonight there was a striking difference. Gone were the work clothes I was used to. He was wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit, sharp and elegant, the kind that quietly announced success. The front door opened before he could knock, and suddenly he was standing in Porter's foyer. The space felt smaller somehow, as if his presence filled it completely. It wasn't just his height or posture. It was something deeper, something I hadn't seen before. Command. "Sorry I'm late," he said, his voice calm, with a depth that caught my attention. His eyes found mine across the room, and he smiled in a way that instantly settled my nerves. Traffic was worse than I expected. Then he turned toward Porter, and the atmosphere shifted. The silence stretched, tight and uncomfortable. Donovan stood there in that immaculate suit, and for a brief moment I wondered if I was looking at a stranger. This wasn't just the man who helped me with groceries, who taught me how to change a tire, who held my hand through sleepless nights when I was afraid of losing everything. "Donovan," Porter said, slipping into his practiced, professional tone as he extended his hand. "I'm Porter Henley, Francine's ex-husband." Donovan looked at the offered hand for a moment longer than necessary, then took it. "I know exactly who you are, Mr. Henley," he replied evenly. Something in his voice made my skin prickle. It wasn't anger. It wasn't warmth either. It was confidence, the kind that comes from knowing you're standing on solid ground. "Beautiful home," Donovan continued, his eyes drifting over the marble floors, the chandelier, the carefully chosen art. "Very impressive. Though I have to say, the office building where we've crossed paths before has more character." Porter frowned. "I'm sorry. I don't believe we've met. Haven't we?" Donovan's smile was polite, but unyielding. "Henley, Morrison and Associates, downtown, 42nd floor. You've walked past me in the halls more times than I can count." Understanding hit me all at once. Porter's firm was housed in one of the most prestigious buildings in the city, the kind where cleaning crews worked late at night after everyone else had gone home. "The cleaning crew," Porter said slowly. "The company that services your building," Donovan corrected calmly. "I own it." The words landed hard. Michael nearly dropped his glass. Sarah's expression froze. David stared in silence, and Porter looked like the floor had shifted beneath him. The color drained from his face, and for the first time in years, he looked unsure. "You own Superior Cleaning Services," Porter said, as if repeating it might help it make sense. "Among other things," Donovan replied, stepping further into the room. Without realizing it, everyone made space for him. "We hold the contract for your building and several others downtown. I believe your firm pays us around $200,000 a year." The number hung in the air. $200,000, more than double my yearly support and just one of his contracts. "But I've seen you working," Porter said, struggling to regain control, mopping floors, emptying trash. "I stay involved," Donovan said evenly. "It helps me understand my business from every angle. And it gives me insight into the companies we work with." The meaning behind his words was quiet, but unmistakable. Sarah finally spoke, forcing a smile. "That's unexpected. We had no idea." "Francine doesn't measure people by titles or income," Donovan said, looking at me. "She cared about who I am, not what I own. Character mattered more to her than status." Everyone knew exactly who that was directed at. Porter's face flushed, his jaw tightening. "If you own the company," Michael said slowly, "why do you still do the work yourself?" Donovan turned to him, and something in his expression hardened just slightly. "Because your father never learned my name," he said calmly. "For 4 years, I cleaned his office. Not once did he acknowledge me. To him, people like me didn't exist." Porter opened his mouth to protest. "That's not true. I'm always professional." "Professional?" Donovan repeated quietly. The room held its breath. Donovan lifted an eyebrow slightly. "Is that what you call it?" he asked calmly. "When you deliberately leave messes just to see how fast they'll be cleaned? Or when you schedule long meetings in conference rooms while the crew is trying to work around you? Or when you joke about the help to your colleagues while we're standing right there?" Each example landed hard. I'd spent 35 years married to Porter. I knew exactly the kind of quiet cruelty Donovan was describing. The way Porter treated anyone he considered beneath him had been a constant source of tension throughout our marriage. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Porter said quickly, slipping back into his professional tone, trying to regain control. "Perhaps we should reset. Why don't we all sit down?" "Actually," Donovan said, cutting in gently as he reached into his jacket, "I have something for you." He pulled out an envelope and handed it to Porter. My ex-husband hesitated before taking it, his fingers unsteady as he opened it. "What is this?" Porter asked, though his face suggested he already knew. "Notice of termination," Donovan said pleasantly. "Effective January 1st, Superior Cleaning Services will no longer be servicing Henley Morrison and Associates." The silence was absolute. Porter stared at the paper as if refusing to believe it would make it disappear. "You can't do this," he finally said, his voice thin. "I can," Donovan replied calmly. "There's a 30-day cancellation clause for either party. I'm exercising it." "But why?" Sarah asked, panic slipping into her voice. She understood exactly what losing a contract of that size meant. Donovan looked at her with something close to compassion. "Because your father has spent 4 years treating my employees with disrespect. Because he believes paying for a service gives him the right to belittle the people providing it. And because I'm done watching decent, hard-working people be treated as if they don't matter." Then he turned back to Porter, his tone sharpening. "And because of what you put Francine through." My heart skipped. "I've heard enough," Donovan continued steadily. "I know about the emotional pressure, the financial manipulation, the way you chipped away at her confidence year after year." I froze. I had never told him the worst parts. "I know about the catering business you pushed her to shut down," he said. "The friends you drove away. The way you convinced her she was incapable, that she was lucky anyone tolerated her, that no one else would ever choose her." Porter's face drained of color. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Donovan replied coolly. "I know you told her she couldn't manage money, then made sure she got as little as possible after the divorce. I know you turned your children against her by rewriting the story. And I know you've spent years trying to make her feel small whenever you had the chance." Each word landed with precision, but what stunned me most wasn't Porter's reaction. It was my children's faces. For the first time, they looked at their father with uncertainty. "These are serious claims," Michael said carefully. "They're not claims," Donovan replied evenly. "They're facts, and facts have consequences." He reached into his jacket once more and handed Porter a business card. "Donovan Mitchell," he said, "CEO and founder of Mitchell Enterprises." Porter stared at the card, horror slowly settling in. "We operate 17 commercial cleaning companies across 3 states, Donovan continued. "We also own multiple office buildings downtown and hold stakes in several local businesses." Even I recognized the name. I'd seen it in business articles. I'd just never connected it to the man who helped me compare grocery prices and wore work clothes stained from long days. David opened his mouth, then closed it again, unable to speak. "The exact number doesn't matter," Donovan added quietly. "What matters is that I have enough influence to protect people who are treated unfairly." Porter looked unwell. "What do you want?" "I want you to treat Francine with respect," Donovan said. "I want you to stop turning your children against her. And I want you to acknowledge that the way you treated her was wrong." "And if I don't?" Porter asked. Donovan's smile faded completely. "Then you'll learn just how much influence I actually have." He turned to me then, his expression softening instantly. "I'm sorry I was late, sweetheart. I needed to finish something first." I stared at him, overwhelmed. "Donovan, I don't understand. If you had all this, why didn't you tell me? Why let me worry about money? About whether I could afford small things?" His face filled with quiet sadness. "Because I needed to know you loved me for who I am, not what I have. I needed to be sure you wouldn't change if you knew." He took my hands gently. You've been surrounded by people who only valued what you could give them. I couldn't stand the idea of becoming another one of those people. I wanted to be someone who chose you, not your circumstances. But all this time, I said quietly, I've been worried about being a burden to you, about whether I was giving enough, whether I was bringing enough into this relationship. You give everything that actually matters, he said without hesitation. Your kindness, your resilience, your ability to find light even after everything you've endured. That's worth more than any amount of money. Around us, my family stood frozen, trying to make sense of a reality that had just flipped upside down. The man they had mocked as unworthy was more accomplished than any of them. The relationship they had dismissed so casually was built on trust and respect, things Porter and I had never truly had. And as I looked into Donovan's eyes, I understood this moment wasn't the end of the story. There was more he hadn't said yet. Judging by the way Porter stared at that business card like it was a warning, he was beginning to realize it too. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 8:30, its deep sound cutting through the heavy silence. I watched Porter's expression shift again and again, confusion, disbelief, rising panic, and finally a grim understanding that stirred something inside me that felt uncomfortably like relief. Mitchell Enterprises, Porter murmured, still staring at the card. You're the Mitchell who bought the Hartwell building last month. Among others, Donovan replied calmly, we've been acquiring properties downtown quietly for the past 5 years. It's surprising how much progress you can make when no one sees you as a threat. Michael stepped forward, his professional instincts kicking in. What exactly are you saying, Mr. Mitchell? I'm not suggesting anything, Donovan said evenly, turning to him. I'm stating facts. Your father's lease is up for renewal in 6 months. As of today, that renewal is uncertain. Michael went pale. Porter's firm occupied prime space in the financial district, locked in at favorable terms from an old agreement. Losing that location would mean enormous costs or a damaging move. You can't do that, Sarah said, panic creeping into her voice. There are protections, yes, Donovan replied smoothly, which I'm very familiar with. When a lease expires, a property owner can choose not to renew, especially if a tenant has been difficult. Difficult how? David asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. Donovan reached into his jacket again, and this time everyone stiffened. He placed a small recorder on the dining table. Your father has been quite outspoken about the cleaning staff, he said calmly, about their intelligence, their value, and where he believes they belong. He pressed play. Porter's voice filled the room, unmistakable and sharp. Complaints about workers, dismissive jokes, cruel laughter. Then more voices, including one that mentioned me mocking, belittling, reducing my life and my choices to a punchline. When the recording stopped, the silence felt unbearable. My chest tightened as I absorbed the reality of hearing it all out loud. But what hurt most was seeing my children's faces, not outrage, but embarrassment. Dad? Sarah whispered. That was taken out of context, Porter said quickly, defaulting to damage control. Just talk between colleagues. There are 6 hours of recordings, Donovan said calmly. Different days, same attitude. He looked at my children one by one. Your father believed his position protected him from consequences. He was mistaken. What do you want? Porter asked again, his voice strained now. I want a few things, Donovan said, stepping beside me. His presence was steady, reassuring, but his tone carried weight. First, I want a formal apology to Francine for the years of emotional pressure and financial control during your marriage. I never mistreated her, Porter protested weakly. Would you like me to play the recording where you explain how you sabotaged her catering business? Donovan asked quietly. Or the one where you describe moving assets to avoid fair support? The room spun. That business had been my dream, my one step toward independence. When it collapsed, I had blamed myself completely. Realizing it had been deliberately undermined felt like reopening an old wound I thought had healed. You recorded conversations in his office? Michael asked tensely. Most were captured in common areas, Donovan replied calmly. The break room, the elevator, the lobby, Donovan replied calmly. All perfectly legal in a one-party consent state, especially when the conversations include admissions of fraud and intentional business interference. Porter swayed slightly. You're talking about things that happened years ago. Some of them, yes, Donovan said smoothly. And some are recent enough to still matter. But that's not the point. I'm not here to ruin you, Porter, though I could. I'm here to make sure you finally face consequences. Then he turned to my children. For years, your father has cast your mother as the villain. He convinced you she was selfish, difficult, unreasonable. The truth is she was trapped in a marriage where her confidence was slowly dismantled, and when she tried to leave, she was punished for it. That's not how we remember it, David said, though his voice lacked certainty. Of course not, Donovan replied gently. You were children. You saw what you were meant to see. But you're adults now. Old enough to understand that someone can be loving in one moment and deeply harmful in another. He reached into his jacket again and removed a thick envelope. These are bank statements, canceled checks, and financial records from the last 10 years of their marriage. They show a pattern of control that would trouble any family court. He handed the envelope to Sarah, whose hands trembled as she took it. Your mother earned money through her catering business and part-time work. Your father redirected those earnings into accounts she didn't know existed, then told her they couldn't afford simple things, family trips that included her, clothes that weren't discounted. Donovan paused, then continued evenly. That money went elsewhere. Gifts, expenses, including for his secretary, the same woman he was involved with during the last 8 years of the marriage, the same woman he plans to marry next month. The room seemed to tilt. Porter was getting married again. None of us had known. I felt a strange mix of emotions, hurt, relief, and a quiet sorrow for the woman stepping into a life I had barely escaped. Stop, Porter whispered. Please. I'm almost done, Donovan said calmly. Your mother endured 20 years of psychological and financial pressure. She found the courage to leave, and she spent the last 4 years rebuilding her life from nothing. She deserves respect, not ridicule, support, not judgment. He looked at my children, one by one. You have a choice. You can keep believing the version you were given. Keep treating your mother as though she's less deserving of happiness. Or you can face the truth and start repairing the damage caused by years of lies. And if we choose wrong? Michael asked quietly. Donovan's expression cooled. Then you'll learn that your mother isn't the only person here with influence. Reputations, referrals, professional standing, those things disappear quickly when the right questions are asked. The warning hung in the air. Porter looked unwell, his face pale and damp despite the cold outside. This isn't over, he muttered. You're right, Donovan said pleasantly. It's not over until Francine receives the apology and respect she's owed, until the truth is acknowledged, and until real amends are made. He turned to me, his voice softening instantly. Are you ready to go home? I looked around one last time, at the house that had once been mine, at the family I'd spent decades trying to please, at the man who had convinced me I was never enough. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. Yes, I said, taking Donovan's arm. I'm ready. As we reached the door, Sarah's voice stopped us. Mom, wait. I turned, hope flickering despite myself. The documents, she said, lifting the envelope. Are these really from Dad's accounts? Every page, Donovan confirmed. They were legally obtained during the divorce. Your mother never saw them. Sarah opened the envelope and pulled out the first statement. Her face drained of color, then flushed, then went pale again. Dad, she whispered, this shows a transfer of $47,000 to Jennifer's account on Mom's birthday. The room went silent. David muttered under his breath. Michael stood frozen, already calculating the implications. We need to talk, Sarah said, turning to Porter, her voice shaking. We need to talk about what really happened in this family. I didn't stay to watch that conversation unfold. I had spent enough years waiting for my children to choose me over their father's version of the truth. That night, I chose myself. As Donovan and I walked toward his Bentley, not something borrowed for appearances, I felt something unfamiliar and exhilarating. Strength. The leather seat cradled me as we drove through the quiet streets, Christmas lights glowing softly in the windows we passed. Inside the car, the silence felt heavy, filled with thoughts neither of us was ready to voice. I watched the city slide by, trying to make sense of everything. "You're upset with me," Donovan said at last, carefully. I turned to look at him in the soft dashboard light. Even after seeing him command that room so effortlessly, there was still a gentleness about him, the same calm presence that had drawn me in from the very beginning. "I'm not upset," I said slowly, checking my own honesty as I spoke. "I'm confused, overwhelmed, but not upset." He stopped at a red light and looked at me fully. "What are you feeling?" The question hit me harder than I expected. When was the last time someone had truly asked that and meant it? "I feel like I don't recognize my own life," I admitted. "I thought I was dating a kind man who ran a cleaning business. I thought I was barely surviving on $800 a month. I thought my family was right that I was a burden, that I couldn't manage on my own." I let out a shaky laugh. "And now I find out the man I love is far more powerful than I ever imagined. That my ex-husband was even crueler than I knew, and that my children might finally be seeing him clearly. It feels unreal." Donovan reached for my hand, his touch steady and reassuring. "I know this is a lot. I never wanted it to come out like that." "How did you want it to come out?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words. "I hoped I'd never have to explain any of it. I hoped your family would eventually come around, that Porter would stop interfering, that you could heal without being dragged back into everything he did. But that didn't happen," I said softly. "No," he agreed. "And watching them hurt you again and again, watching you blame yourself for it, I couldn't stay silent anymore." He pulled into my apartment complex but parked near the small lake instead of my building. The water reflected the holiday lights like scattered stars. "There's more you need to know," he said, turning off the engine. "About how we met, about what I've been doing behind the scenes." My stomach tightened. "More secrets?" "More truths," he corrected gently. "Things I should have told you sooner. I was afraid of how you'd react. I thought of Porter, how he used secrets as leverage, how he controlled me by controlling information. But when I looked at Donovan, I didn't see calculation. I saw fear. Fear of losing me." "Tell me," I said. He took a deep breath, gripping the steering wheel. "We didn't meet by accident at the grocery store." The words felt like cold water. "What do you mean?" "I'd noticed you weeks before," he said quietly. "I learned your routine." I waited for a moment that felt natural. I pulled my hand back, my heart racing. "You were following me?" "No," he said quickly. "Not like that. I was looking into Porter. You were already in his orbit." "Why?" My voice shook despite my effort to stay calm. "Because of him," Donovan said firmly. "Not you." I stared at him, trying to understand. He looked out at the lake for a long moment before speaking again. 4 years ago, my company submitted a bid for the building where Porter's firm is located. We were smaller then, but competitive. Porter sat on the committee reviewing proposals. He paused, his jaw tightening. "We lost the contract. It went to a company that charged more, but happened to be owned by a relative of one of Porter's partners." "That happens," I said cautiously. "It wasn't just the contract," Donovan replied. "It was what he said during that meeting. One of my employees had a friend in administration. She overheard it." He turned back to me, anger flickering briefly in his eyes. "He didn't just reject our bid. He dismissed my company and my employees as people who didn't matter, as if we were beneath consideration." I sat there in silence, the pieces slowly coming together, realizing that our story had been connected long before I ever knew his name. Not anger toward me, but toward the memory he was reliving. Porter had argued against hiring Donovan's company because it employed what he called undesirable people. By that, he meant formerly incarcerated individuals trying to rebuild their lives and immigrants working multiple jobs to support their families. My heart sank. It was exactly the kind of thing Porter used to say, the same quiet prejudice I'd spent years excusing or explaining away. He said people like that couldn't be trusted around valuable property or sensitive information, Donovan continued, his voice low and steady. He said they were probably criminals anyway, and that hiring them would damage the building's image. I closed my eyes, feeling sick. Donovan, I'm so sorry. That's awful. But I don't understand what this has to do with me. That's when I started looking into him, Donovan said. I wanted to understand what kind of man could speak so casually about people who were just trying to survive. What I found was a long pattern, he went on. Quietly settled discrimination cases, complaints from former employees, stories about inappropriate relationships at work. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out another envelope, worn and creased. But this is what really caught my attention. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a newspaper clipping from 3 years earlier, a small article about a charity auction supporting women leaving harmful relationships. In the group photo of volunteers, I saw my own face. You were volunteering at the shelter, Donovan said softly, helping other women start over. That's when I realized Porter's ex-wife wasn't just another casualty of his behavior. You were someone who survived it. Tears blurred my vision as memories rushed back. The shelter had saved me after the divorce. It was where I finally learned that what I'd lived through wasn't normal and wasn't my fault. Volunteering there had been part of healing, a way to help others walking the same painful road. I watched how he treated you during the divorce, Donovan continued. The manipulation, the money games, the way he turned your children against you, and I decided I wanted to help. Help how? I whispered. At first, by documenting who he really was, he said. I worked in his building personally. I listened. I recorded. I gathered proof. I thought one day it might matter. He reached out and gently wiped away a tear I hadn't noticed falling. And then I started paying attention to you, he said quietly, just to make sure you were okay. I saw you skipping meals to stretch your budget, walking to work in the rain when your car broke down, struggling alone. My face burned. You saw all that? I saw a woman barely getting by because her ex-husband had taken everything from her, he said. And I couldn't just stand back. So you helped, I said slowly. How? Your rent, he said simply. For 6 months, I paid the difference between what you could afford and what you actually owed. You thought your landlord gave you a break. It was me. I stared at him. 6 months? That's thousands. 3,600 to be exact, he said, plus car repairs, groceries, utility bills when you were short. I made sure it never traced back to me. The world felt unsteady. Why would you do that? We weren't even together then. Because you reminded me of my mother, he said quietly. I froze. Your mother? She was married to my father for 22 years, he said. He was respected, successful, charming, and controlling, manipulative. He convinced her she was nothing without him. Donovan's voice tightened. When she finally left, he made sure she had nothing. He hid money, turned her own children against her. She spent her last 10 years struggling, convinced she deserved it. What happened to her? I asked softly. She passed away alone, he said. In a small apartment, surrounded by bills she couldn't pay and photos of grandchildren she wasn't allowed to see. His hands clenched. I was building my business by then. I could have helped, but she refused. She didn't want to be a burden. Understanding hit me all at once. So when you saw Porter doing the same thing to me, I saw my mother, he finished, and I promised myself I wouldn't let it happen again if I had the power to stop it. We sat in silence, the weight of his words settling in. Suddenly everything made sense: why he hid his success, why he moved slowly, why he never pushed. The grocery store, I said quietly. That day you helped me with my bags. I'd been working up the courage to approach you for weeks, he admitted. When I saw you struggling, it felt like the right moment. And everything after that? I asked. Real, he said without hesitation. Every bit of it. The way I care for you, the way I treat you. None of that was an act. For the first time in a long while, I believed it. Every moment with you has been genuine, he said quietly. Every feeling, every word. The only thing I kept from you was the money, and only because I needed to know you could love me without it. I looked out at the lake, watching the Christmas lights ripple across the water, trying to absorb everything. 6 months of quiet support, months spent uncovering Porter's behavior, a lifetime of success hidden behind worn work clothes and an old truck. "There's one more thing," Donovan said softly. I turned toward him, unsure if I had the strength for another revelation. When I said I owned 17 cleaning companies, that was an understatement. Mitchell Enterprises owns or holds major stakes in 43 businesses across 5 states. The company is worth about $68 million. The number didn't feel real. $68 million. It was more money than I could even comprehend. "And you let me stress over splitting dinner checks," I said weakly. "I fell in love with a woman who worried about small expenses," he replied gently, but still gave her last $20 to a struggling veteran outside a restaurant. "I fell in love with someone whose character outweighs any amount of money." He took my hands again, and this time I didn't pull away. "I know this is overwhelming," he said. "I know you may feel confused, but everything I've done has been because I love you. I wanted to protect you and give you room to heal without pressure." I looked into his eyes, the same eyes that had steadied me during panic, the same hands that had helped me through ordinary moments of life. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," he said softly, kissing my knuckles, "you decide if you can forgive the secrecy, if you can trust me, and if you want a future with someone who will never let you face Porter's cruelty alone again." As if on cue, my phone vibrated. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. "Mom, we need to talk. Can I come by tomorrow? There are things about Dad I didn't know, things I need to apologize for." I showed the message to Donovan. He smiled quietly. "It's beginning," he said. "They're finally seeing it." I smiled back. "Yes," I said. "I think they are." Sarah arrived the next morning at exactly 9, holding a tray of coffee from the upscale cafe downtown. Her makeup couldn't hide that she'd been crying. I watched her sit in her car for a few minutes, gathering herself. When she finally knocked, she looked more uncertain than I'd seen her since she was a little girl. "Mom," she said, offering the coffee like a peace gesture, "I brought your favorite, vanilla latte, extra foam." The simplicity of it caught me off guard. She remembered. "Come in," I said. She stepped into my small living room and looked around. Really looked, for the first time in years. The secondhand furniture, the photos lining the wall, school events, graduations, moments she might not even remember I was there for. "You kept all of these," she said softly, stopping at a photo from her high school graduation. "Of course I did," I said. "You're my children." She turned toward me, eyes filled with tears. "Even after how we treated you?" We both knew the answer. "Sit down," I said gently. "Tell me what you came to say." She sat on the edge of the couch, clutching her coffee. "I read everything Donovan gave me," she said. "Every statement, every check, every transfer." She pulled the thick envelope from her bag, now covered in notes and highlights. "Mom, I had no idea. I thought Dad controlling the money was normal. I thought that's just how marriages worked." "What did you find?" I asked quietly. "Everything," she said, her voice breaking. "The money from your catering business that he redirected into his own accounts. Grandma Patterson's inheritance that he said went to taxes but actually went into investments under his name. The insurance policy he cashed out without telling you." Each detail hurt, but it also confirmed what I'd spent years doubting. "And the worst part," she continued through tears, "was reading his notes about the divorce. He planned how to limit what you received, how to make you seem unreliable. He wrote down things you said during arguments and twisted them to make you sound irrational." She held up a page in Porter's handwriting. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she whispered. He documented every time you forgot something or made a small mistake, building a narrative that you weren't capable of handling money or making decisions, Sarah said. My hands trembled as I took the page from her, seeing my most vulnerable moments reduced to neat bullet points in my ex-husband's handwriting felt like a violation all over again. And there's more, Sarah added quietly. The recordings. What recordings? I asked. Donovan didn't play all of them last night, she said. There are hours, conversations Dad had with his lawyer, with his partners, and with Jennifer. She swallowed hard. They talked about you like you were a problem to manage, something in the way. She set her coffee down and moved closer to me on the couch. In one recording, his lawyer asks if he's sure about pushing for such a low support payment. Dad laughs and says it doesn't matter because you'll probably remarry quickly anyway, that you're the type who can't survive on your own. The ease with which he'd said it stole my breath. Porter had known exactly how impossible $800 a month was. He'd expected desperation to push me into dependence on someone else. But when you didn't, Sarah continued, her voice shaking, when you just kept going on your own, he got angry. There's a recording from about 1.5 years ago where he tells Jennifer that your independence makes him look bad, that people are starting to wonder why his former wife is struggling while he's planning an expensive wedding. So that's why, I said quietly, why he got worse, why he pushed you kids to pull away even more. Sarah nodded, miserable. He told us you were manipulating us, that you were pretending to struggle to make him look heartless, that you were exaggerating to get sympathy. I thought about the times I'd swallowed my pride and asked for help, a ride to the doctor, a little money for groceries after an unexpected bill. Each time, I'd been met with sighs, lectures, warnings about being irresponsible. We believed him, Sarah whispered, because believing him was easier than admitting our father could be that cruel. A knock at the door cut through the moment. When I looked through the peephole, I saw Michael and David standing there, both looking tense and uncertain. Did you call them? I asked. Sarah shook her head. We agreed to come separately. I guess they couldn't wait. I opened the door to find my sons holding a bakery bag from the place I used to love, the one near Porter's house I hadn't been able to afford in years. Mom, Michael said awkwardly, can we come in? I stepped aside, and suddenly my small living room felt crowded with years of unspoken hurt. David looked around with the same surprise Sarah had earlier, like he was seeing my life clearly for the first time. We've been talking all night, Michael said, about the recordings, the documents, about things we should have noticed a long time ago. Like what? I asked, sitting down. Like the fact that you never spoke badly about Dad to us, David said quietly. Even when things were awful, you never tried to turn us against him. While he spent years doing exactly that to you, Michael added, his voice tight. What he did violates every principle of basic decency. I looked at my children, really looked at them, and saw something new. Shame, regret, and maybe the beginning of understanding. There's something else, Sarah said, glancing at her brothers. We called Dad this morning. My stomach tightened. He tried to say Donovan was lying, Michael said, that the documents were fake, the recordings twisted. But when we asked specific questions, David added, about dates and transfers, he hung up, just like he used to hang up on you when you questioned him. And then Jennifer called me, Sarah said softly. About an hour later, Dad had some kind of breakdown. He's been drinking since last night, saying Donovan is trying to destroy him. She's scared, Sarah continued. She asked if I thought Dad might do something reckless when he drinks. A chill ran through me. Porter had never crossed certain lines, but his behavior always worsened when alcohol was involved, and now he was cornered. You need to be careful, Mom, Michael said, his voice protective in a way I hadn't heard in years. If Dad decides you're responsible for this, he could act irrationally. Before I could answer, my phone rang. Donovan's name filled the screen, and I picked up immediately. Sweetheart, Donovan said, his voice steady but urgent. I need you to listen carefully. Porter showed up at my office building this morning. He was drunk and making threats. Security escorted him out, but I think it would be best if you stayed somewhere else tonight." "What kind of threats?" I asked, fully aware my children were listening. "He accused me of turning you against him," Donovan said, "of stealing you from him. He said he'd make me pay for ruining his life." He paused. "Francine, he isn't thinking clearly. I don't believe he'd hurt you physically, but manipulation is his weapon, and when people like him feel cornered, they can act unpredictably." I looked at my children and for the first time in years saw real concern on their faces. "I'll be okay," I said. "I'm not alone." "Good," Donovan replied. "I've already arranged for a security system to be installed in your building today, and I have people keeping an eye on things until he calms down." When I ended the call, the room fell silent. Finally, Sarah spoke. "We failed you," she said quietly, "for years. As your children, as people." "You were influenced," I said, though even to my own ears it sounded too gentle for the damage done. "That's not an excuse," Michael said firmly. "We're adults. We should have asked questions. We should have looked closer instead of accepting Dad's version as the truth." David walked over to the wall of photographs and stopped at one of himself at 10 years old, missing a front tooth, grinning in his baseball uniform. "I remember that game," he said softly. "Dad couldn't come because of work. You were there. You were always there." "You worked 2 jobs when I was in high school to help pay for my car," Sarah added, tears slipping down her face. "You never made me feel guilty about it. I know now how hard that must have been. And when I graduated law school," Michael said slowly, "you told everyone how proud you were. Dad barely reacted because he was angry I didn't join his firm right away." They were finally remembering, seeing past the story Porter had built and looking at the truth of their childhood, seeing me not as the problem, but as the constant. "Can you forgive us?" Sarah asked, her voice breaking. "I know we don't deserve it, but can you?" I looked at them, still my children, despite everything. Still the babies I once held, the teenagers I worried over, the adults I'd hoped would choose compassion over convenience. "I never stopped loving you," I said simply. "Even when you hurt me, even when you chose him, I never stopped being your mother." Sarah broke down then, the kind of crying that comes when denial finally collapses. Michael sank into a chair, covering his face. David stood silently, shoulders shaking. "What do we do now?" Michael asked at last. "How do we fix this?" "You start by choosing differently," I said. "You treat me like family, not an obligation. You build honesty instead of control." "And Dad?" David asked. "What do we do about him?" I thought of Porter angry, alone, facing consequences he'd spent decades avoiding. For a moment I felt a flicker of pity. It passed. "You make your own choices about your father," I said. "I won't turn you against him, but I won't pretend what he did was okay either." Sarah reached for my hands. "We want to start over. We want to earn your trust." For the first time in 4 years, something stirred inside me that I'd thought was gone for good. Hope. Outside, winter clouds gathered, dark and heavy. Inside, surrounded by my children and their fragile attempts to rebuild, I felt warmth. Healing wasn't instant. Trust didn't return overnight. But for the first time since my divorce, I wasn't facing the future alone. And somewhere across the city, Porter was learning that control doesn't last forever, and that people eventually reclaim their freedom. 6 months later, I stood in the garden of Donovan's estate, our estate, a thought that still surprised me, watching my grandson take his first unsteady steps across the lawn. Sarah and her husband had driven down for the weekend, part of the new rhythm we'd built together. "He's going to walk before his first birthday," Sarah said, sitting beside me. "Just like you said Michael did." It still amazed me, these shared memories spoken freely again. The rebuilding hadn't been easy. There were awkward conversations, cautious apologies, moments when old habits threatened to resurface. But we kept choosing differently, and that made all the difference. But we had all committed to doing the work, and slowly something real had begun to grow out of the wreckage Porter left behind. "Grandma Francine!" 2-year-old Emma called from the swing set, where Michael was pushing her higher than Sarah would probably approve of. "Come push me too." "I'm coming, sweetheart," I called back, smiling as I started to stand. Sarah caught my arm gently. "Wait. There's something I need to tell you," she said, her tone serious. My stomach tightened on instinct. Even after 6 months of calm, Porter's shadow still had a way of stirring old anxiety. "What is it?" I asked. "The wedding's off," Sarah said quietly. "Jennifer left him last week." I searched myself for a reaction, satisfaction, pity, vindication, but what I felt most was nothing. Porter's personal chaos no longer had power over me. "What happened?" I asked. "According to Jennifer, he's been drinking heavily since Christmas," Sarah said. "Becoming paranoid, accusatory, controlling." She hesitated. "She said he became obsessed with you and Donovan, convinced you were plotting against him." I felt a familiar chill. "Did anything happen?" Sarah nodded reluctantly. "He showed up drunk at my house 2 months ago, demanding to know why I was choosing you over him. When I tried to explain it wasn't about sides, he started yelling about how Donovan had brainwashed us." She pulled out her phone and showed me a screenshot. The message was unmistakably Porter's. "Your mother destroyed this family with her selfishness and lies. Don't let her poison your children against their grandfather." "He sent similar messages to Michael and David," Sarah said. "Always late at night, always after drinking. Jennifer told me he'd spend hours ranting about how happy you looked," Sarah added. "How unfair it was that you landed on your feet while he was falling apart." "Is he actually falling apart?" I asked, surprised by my own calm curiosity. "Yes," Sarah said plainly. "His practice is unraveling. Losing Donovan's contract was only the beginning. Other service providers won't work with his firm anymore. Word spreads fast." She shifted uneasily. "And the recordings? They had consequences." "What kind?" "The Bar Association opened an investigation," she said. "Nothing criminal, but enough to damage his standing. Clients are leaving. His partners are talking about pushing him out." I thought of the man I'd been married to for 35 years, the man who had built his entire identity on power, prestige, and control. For someone like Porter, losing respect would hurt more than losing money. "How do you feel about all that?" I asked. Sarah watched Emma toddle across the grass, arms outstretched with determination. "I think he did this to himself," she said quietly, "and maybe if he'd faced consequences years ago, he wouldn't be like this now." "And you're not angry with Donovan?" I asked. "No," she said without hesitation. "I'm grateful. Dad needed to be stopped. None of us were brave enough or informed enough to do it." Footsteps on the garden path drew our attention. Donovan was walking toward us, having just finished a call with the architects designing the new community center we were funding. Even after 6 months of marriage, my heart still skipped when I saw him. Not because of the wealth or the security, though those were comforts I didn't take for granted, but because of the way he looked at me. Like I mattered. Like I was chosen. "How are my favorite ladies?" he asked, sitting beside me and automatically taking my hand. "Sarah was updating me on Porter," I said. Donovan's expression softened. "I heard Jennifer left. I'm sorry, Sarah, I know that affects you too." It was such a small thing to say, but it mattered. He understood that even when consequences are deserved, they still ripple outward and hurt people who didn't cause them. "This is one of the reasons I wanted to talk," Sarah said. "We're worried about Dad's drinking, about him being alone in that house. Michael thinks we should plan some kind of intervention." Donovan didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned to me, his eyes asking a silent question. That was one of the biggest changes in my life now. He never spoke for me, never assumed, never took control of decisions that involved my family. He waited, and for the first time in my life, I felt the full weight and the full freedom of being respected. "What do you think?" I asked Sarah. "Do you believe an intervention would actually help him, or would it just give him another chance to twist things and hurt you again?" "I honestly don't know," she said. Part of me feels like we owe it to him to try. He's still our father no matter what. And another part of me thinks he'll only change if he wants to, and that stepping in might just give him more leverage later. It was a thoughtful answer, a clear-eyed one. 6 months earlier, that kind of clarity would have been impossible while my children were still caught in his version of reality. Here's what I think, I said slowly. You should do what feels right for you, without worrying about how it affects me. Your relationship with your father is separate from your relationship with me. But we want your opinion, Sarah said. We value your judgment now. The words hit me harder than I expected. For years my thoughts had been dismissed, my instincts ignored. Hearing my adult children actively seek my perspective felt like a quiet miracle. My opinion, I said, is that Porter needs professional help, therapy, addiction counseling, maybe both, but none of it matters unless he wants it. You can't force someone to change if they don't believe there's a problem. And if he does want help? Sarah asked. Then you support him with boundaries, I said. You don't let his struggles become an excuse to mistreat you, and you don't sacrifice your own well-being to save him from consequences. Donovan squeezed my hand. Your mother has become very wise when it comes to unhealthy behavior, he said with a small smile. I had an excellent teacher, I replied, squeezing back. The sound of car doors drew our attention toward the driveway. Michael and David had arrived with their families, and within minutes the garden filled with laughter, children running and overlapping conversations. It felt natural, easy, the way family was meant to feel, not the rigid performance Porter once demanded, but people simply being themselves. Grandma, David called. Emma wants you to read her the Brave Princess story again. The one where she saves herself? I called back. That's the one. I settled beneath the oak tree with Emma and her favorite book, a story about a princess who used her wit and courage to solve her own problems instead of waiting to be rescued. Why do you like this story so much? I asked as she curled against me. Because the princess is smart and she doesn't give up, Emma said with complete certainty. And because she makes her own happy ending, I added. She doesn't need a prince, Emma said proudly. She's brave by herself. As I read about the princess outsmarting the dragon, I thought about my own ending. Not the old fairy tale where someone comes to save you, but the better one where a woman saves herself and then chooses a partner who respects her strength. By sunset, the garden slowly emptied. There were hugs, promises to call, plans already forming for the next visit, the kind of closeness that comes from genuine connection. Thank you, Michael said as he hugged me, for not giving up on us, for showing us how to do better. Thank you for letting me love you again, I replied. After the house grew quiet, Donovan and I moved through the rooms, turning off lights and setting the security system. Even now, the space sometimes felt unreal larger than any place I'd ever lived, but Donovan had made it clear from the beginning that this was our home, not something I was borrowing. Penny for your thoughts, he said as we settled into bed. I was thinking about Emma's story, I said, about brave princesses, and about how different my life is now, how different I am. He turned toward me in the soft glow of the room. Different how? Stronger, more confident, more myself, I said after a moment. When I was married to Porter, I spent so much time trying to be what he wanted that I lost who I was. And after the divorce, I was so broken I couldn't imagine ever feeling whole again. But you were always strong, Donovan said gently. You survived 35 years of emotional pressure and still had enough compassion left to volunteer at a women's shelter. You rebuilt your life from nothing and never let yourself turn cold or bitter, even though you had every reason to. I didn't feel strong, I admitted. I felt like a failure. That's because Porter spent decades convincing you that simply surviving wasn't enough, Donovan said quietly. He trained you to believe you should be grateful for whatever scraps he decided to give you. His voice hardened just slightly. He came close to destroying something rare and beautiful, but he didn't succeed. He didn't, I said. And now, my children finally see the truth. They understand what really happened in our marriage. They do, Donovan agreed, and they'll probably try the intervention. It may fail at first. People like Porter don't change until they've lost everything they value: status, reputation, control, even the illusion of being admired. Does that make you sad? I asked. I thought about it carefully. It makes me sad for the man he could have been if he'd chosen differently. It makes me sad for my children, having to watch their father unravel, but it doesn't make me sad for me. I'm free of his chaos now. Donovan pulled me closer, and I rested against his chest with a sense of peace I had never known in my first marriage. This was what love was supposed to feel like. Safe, steady, rooted in respect rather than power. I have something to tell you, he said softly. More secrets? I teased, without fear this time. Good news, he smiled. The city approved the community center project. Construction starts next month. The center had been my idea, a place where women leaving harmful relationships could find job training, childcare, legal help, and counseling under one roof. Donovan had funded the land and the construction without hesitation. That's incredible, I said. I can't wait to see it come to life. I was thinking we should name it after someone who represents the kind of strength we want those women to see, he said. Would you be willing to let us call it the Francine Mitchell Center for Women's Independence? I pulled back, stunned. You want to name it after me? I want to name it after the woman who taught me what real courage looks like, he said. Someone who survived what would have broken most people and still chose kindness. Tears filled my eyes. That's too much. I'm not a hero. You are, he said firmly. You prove that rebuilding is possible, that joy can return, that life doesn't end just because someone tried to make it smaller. I thought of the woman I had been a year earlier, standing outside Porter's house with a cheap bottle of wine and a desperate hope for reconciliation. She never could have imagined this life, this love, this purpose. Okay, I said softly. If it helps other women, then yes. There's one more thing, Donovan said, reaching into the nightstand. I know we're already married, but I wanted to give you this. He opened a small velvet box. Inside was a ring not extravagant, not meant to impress. The stones formed a word in soft colors. Brave. It's perfect, I whispered, sliding it onto my finger beside my wedding band. Just like you, he said. As sleep settled over us, I thought about fairy tales and happy endings, about the difference between being rescued and being respected, between being controlled and being cherished. Outside the window, city lights shimmered like distant stars. Somewhere in the darkness, Porter was probably alone, angry, blaming the world for consequences he had earned. That was his story now. Mine was just beginning. There would be planning meetings and phone calls and new projects. There would be Sunday brunches with my children and grandchildren, honest conversations, slow healing, a life built on truth instead of fear. And there would be love, real love, the kind that makes you stronger, not smaller. At 62, I finally learned the difference between being wanted and being treasured. It was worth the wait. Now I'm curious about you, the one who listened to my story. What would you do in my place? Have you ever faced something similar? Share your thoughts in the comments, and on the final screen, I'm leaving 2 more stories from this channel that might surprise you. Thank you for watching until the end.